And what had happened, and I found this all later, they, 1st Infantry, we were trying to take Aachen. We started, and this is mid-September, to try to take Aachen. We didn't get Aachen until early November, where we actually took the town. And the 1st Infantry had pushed up on the night of the 15th, had pushed up and taken this little area where I came down. It was a little town called Ellendorf, which was a suburb of Aachen. And they were having trouble holding it. And so they were getting ready to pull back, and they saw my chute, and guys came out and picked me up, took me to a back hospital. But before they did that, they took me in and into an area, and I was in a command post, and I met a full colonel. And I found out later who he was. He was the commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment, and he asked me if you wanted dinner, and I said, well, I don't know what I said. Anyway, I apparently sat down and had dinner with him or ate with him, and I do remember going outside this area and throwing it up, so I knew I had eaten something. But they put me in a 2.5-ton truck, and where they put the stretchers, they put them in between the side gates, and there was some Germans in there and some Americans and me, and they hauled us back, and they took me to what I found out later was the 45th Back Hospital, and they treated me there, but right at that moment, I don't remember too much about all this going on, except I thought it was getting dark. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd been on the ground for quite a while. And I found out later that my eyes had been pretty flash burns in my face and hands and everything, and I couldn't see for a couple of days. So apparently my eyes were swelling shut or something, and I think it's getting dark. But they hauled me into the hospital, and I was very fortunate. They had a doctor there who either had developed or was using a new technique on burns. And they took me in this operating room, and it was colder than hell, and I'm vibrating like blazes, and they start picking like this. And they're going to drive me crazy. And what it was, they developed this new technique where they picked all the burn areas out to get it off there, so you heal from the inside out. And as I went back through the hospital system, they'd used me as a demonstration to these kids that have been caught in tanks and badly burned, much worse than I was. And they were telling them that, look what we did here, look how quickly he's healing, meaning me, using this technique. And so apparently I was one of the very first that they'd ever used this on. But when we were put on this train, the hospital train, and taken to the American hospital in Paris, and they haul me in there, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "Hell, I know you." He says, "We picked you up." And his name was Leonard Scott. He was with the 1st Infantry Division, Company C, and he was a 2nd lieutenant. And he became my friend. He stayed with me for quite a while, and he had witnessed almost all of this operation as we yo-yoed around the area while he was seeing a good part. And then he told me a lot about what happened. They told me that they estimated there were 20 enemy aircraft, and that somehow or other that story has stuck with my story. I don't know what they were. I mean, he actually was where I got most of my information about what had gone on. So we went through the hospital chain, and you know,
was he in the hospital for something? Had he been injured as well?
Yeah, we get to England, and he's telling me a little bit about infantry life, and he had landed with the 1st Infantry Division in North Africa. He went all through North Africa and went to Sicily, and he had been very badly wounded in Sicily, and he and another officer had manned an anti-tank gun in some big operation in Sicily, and the two of them stayed with this anti-tank gun when everybody else had departed. And anyway, he had received a Distinguished Service Cross. And that was the first time I ever heard the term Distinguished Service Cross. And so now I'm starting. He started in 42, and he went through North Africa, he went to Sicily, he went to England, he made D-Day. And
Wow.
I said, well, how come you're still a 2nd lieutenant? Well, we hadn't been in, we were sent to England. They took us to the Netley Hospital, which was this gigantic hospital right outside of Southampton that had been built in the Boer Wars, something like that, big, looked like a castle. And so we hadn't been in there 2 hours, and this cute little nurse shows up with a Class A uniform for Leonard Scott, and Scott was gone. I mean, we didn't see him for 10 days. So I figured that Leonard Scott was probably a 1st lieutenant 4 or 5 times.
It sounds like from the cute nurse, it might have been worth it to stay at that
I'm
rank.
sure it was. But, you know, we were quite close for just a few weeks, and for years and years and years, I tried to find Leonard Scott. I knew that he made it through the war. I knew that he'd gotten off, separated from active duty, and at Fort Lewis, and he was from the Dalles, Oregon, and I tried to find him. And about a year ago, my wife sat down at the computer, and in a matter of a couple hours, she finds his two daughters. And he had gone through Korea, went back on active duty, went through Korea. He was, he had this Distinguished Service Cross. He had the Purple Heart with 7 clusters.
Jeez.
And he had been hit, he said he made the D-Day landing, and in 20 minutes he was on a landing craft on his way back to England. He'd gotten hit that quickly.
Wow.
And then the day after I was shot down, he got hit again. And he went back, after we separated, he went back to the 1st Infantry Division, Company C. And it's funny, coming up to more recent times, I built a number, I used to build, we still build airport facilities, but I used to build air cargo buildings and so forth and lease them to the airlines, and I did a lot of work with Flying Tigers. And I knew Bob Prescott pretty well, who was the president of Tigers, and I knew Wayne Hoffman, who was the chairman of the board of Tigers.
So tell us a little bit about the Flying Tigers if people don't know.
The Flying Tigers is an airline, cargo airline that was sold to Federal Express and is now part of Federal Express. And Tigers was named because Bob Prescott, who was president of Tigers, had flown with the Flying Tiger organization in China, one of the original Flying Tigers. And right after the war, he started a little airline. and called it Flying Tigers, and it became a gigantic air cargo facility. And they were flying all over the world, and so I started building facilities and leasing to them. And so knew Bob and knew Wayne Hoffman real well, and I knew that Wayne Hoffman had been in the Army and been in the infantry, but we never talked about it. And Wayne's wife wrote a book, and she took all of Wayne's letters that he had written home from Europe during the war and put them in this book. And so they gave me a book, and I read it, and I come to September 16th. Wayne Hoffman is in Ellendorf, Germany, in the first part of the Siegfried Line. 5 o'clock in the evening, in his letter to his wife, he said, a very short letter, he said, I'm in Ellendorf, and there's an air battle going on above us. And we get talking, and that was me. And here we'd been friends for a number of years, and we'd never really talked about it. And he was Company D of the 16th Regiment. Leonard Scott was Company C of the 16th Regiment. And we never put all this together.
That's unbelievable.
So it's amazing what comes out. And I found out that two of the people that on the German side that I've been involved with, Major Boris, this is a long story. I don't know how far you want to go with this.
We go as long as you want to talk.
Well, Major Boris, I'll go back a step. I heard from a gentleman in Holland, and they had some information about my airplane. And this gentleman had written several big historical books. And he lived in that little area where Belgium and Holland and Germany all come together. And he had found like 500 wrecks, aircraft wrecks in this area, and traced them down in history and recorded it. And they came up with a P-38 in Ellendorf, Germany. And so they figured out and found that it was my airplane. And they found it in 1997. And so anyway, in a series of steps, they get in contact with me. And he had studied that air warfare in that area and was writing another book about that. And so he wanted to talk to me about it, and we did. But unfortunately, he passed away. But very early, he was a young man. And so I never got a souvenir from the wreck of my airplane. It's there someplace waiting for me if I can find it. But he told me that he came up with two names, that he had read this book by Caldwell. There's a story called the War Diary of J.G. 26, the yellow-nosed Abbeville boys, yellow-nosed aircraft. And he had written on September 16th, he had this story about attacking the 370th group, and the Germans claimed 4 P-38s had been shot down. And that wasn't true. I was the only one that lost. They actually attacked the group after my engagement with them. They finally got their act together, I guess, and attacked the group and didn't do too well. But like 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, whatever the time element. But he figured out that one of two people had shot me down. One fellow was Major Boris. Major Boris had shot down, his first victory was in 1939. He shot down a Spitfire. He had, if he got me, I was his 42nd victory.
Wow.
The other guy was a fellow by the name of Keith Mueller, and if he got me, I would have been his 82nd victory. So these guys were not beginners. And so all this information's dribbling in over the last 60 years. So by the time I find out about Boris and the Luftwaffe, they've died. So I've never got a chance to talk with them. But through Scott, we found Scott's daughter is a very famous interior decorator in San Francisco. And so we're going to get together with her, and she said that her father passed away at a very early age. I think he was in his 50s. But so all of this just keeps coming in. We keep hearing more and more. You find something will accidentally be unearthed. Or
Interesting stories there, Jim, but you haven't told us about the nurse. Helping you with your clothes.
Oh, the nurse.
This is a G-rated podcast most of the time.
Come on
Well,
now.
they're
Echo can bleep some of it out, I'm sure.
yeah. There were some lovely nurses, and
I think we all know what that means.
they were so wonderful. I mean, these gals were just unbelievable how they took care of you.
Yeah. No, it's actually, we've read some books on the podcast where there was nurses that were over in France and they were receiving guys right off the front lines.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had me on this 45th, and I wake up and I'm hearing all of this big banging going on. Well, the 45th hospital is here, and there's right behind it here, there's a 105 artillery firing over the hospital. And they took me from there I went to the hospital, the general hospital in Brussels. No, not Brussels. Where Maastricht. And I left there one day, and then the next day after I left, a V1 rocket thing flew right into the side of the hospital there. And I have pictures of it that I took. This is later, my second tour through the hospital, which is another story. But so that was a big tragedy. They killed a number of the people and hit one of the wards. And those were nurses that I knew. But
how long did it take you to recover? And did you fly again, or was being shot down and wounded, was that the end of the war for you?
No, well, it was in combat, really. I went through the hospital chain, and I was released in England, went back. I was going through Paris, and, when the hospitals would collect the uniforms, they took all my flying jacket and everything was burned from the wreck. So they strip you down and throw it all away. And so now I'm in a hospital in England, and they're going to release me, and I'm going back to my squadron. I'm ready to fly. This is in November. And my burns had healed pretty well. And so they give me a uniform to wear. And I don't know how many guys or how many times this guy, whoever's uniform it was, had been hit, but there was sure a bunch of holes in it that they'd matched up. And I found a hat, and so I had no money, and so I'm creaking my way back. I went to London, and then I got a flight to Paris, and I got to Paris, and so I decided, well, I'm in Paris, and I'm on my way back to the squadron. I'm going to see something. So I went down to the Lido Club, and I still like to dance, but I like swing. And so I'm in the Lido Club, and they have this pretty little gal singing some French tunes, and then they asked a few people if they wanted to do a little jitterbug. So we had quite a night, and so I left early, and I'm figuring on where I'm going to sleep, and I'm walking down the avenue, and here comes a gaggle again of guys with pinks on and the green jerseys and everything. Damn, here comes my battle jacket, my pants. These are all friends of mine, and they're wearing my clothes. So they were staying at the Claridge Hotel right next to the Lido Club. So all of a sudden, I'm better dressed. And I borrowed some money, and we enjoyed Paris.
And then did you get back to the squadron?
Went back to the squadron with them.
And
they had transportation, so I went back with them. And I'm there I walked in, and everybody's glad to see me. And they say, God, we just got a brand new P-38 in, right from Ireland. Just came through. It's yours. And boy, it was a beauty. So I'm all ready to start flying again. And Doc Berg, who was our flight, he comes to me and he says, Jim, he says, I don't like the way you're walking. And I said, well, I'm just a little bit sore, but everything's fine. And he said, well, we're going over to, we were at A78 at that time in Florence, Belgium. He says, we'll go over to Charleroi and just check you out. And so I go over to the hospital at Charleroi with him. And the next thing you knew, I got a cast from here down to my rear end. And they x-rayed me, and I had a broken back that they hadn't treated. So back to the hospital. And so I went through that, went back to 3rd Military. Well, they had what they did is they had a central medical section, and they run all the pilots through there, and then they would determine what happens to you. And so I kept saying, well, I want to go back to the squadron. And so they said, okay, you got your cast. And they took the big cast off and put a small one on and said, we're going to send you to England for at least 30 days to a flak house. Well, flak houses is where they run by the Red Cross, and mainly were for bomber crews. If the bomber crew were getting a little nervous or something, they'd send them down for a week or so. And so they sent me to this flak house. And the first thing I get in trouble with the Red Cross is fighter pilots like to talk about combat and flying. And these bomber guys didn't want to have anything to do with that kind of conversation. So the Red Cross gets upset with me, and they tell me I got to keep my mouth shut. And I said, well, fine, I'll keep my mouth shut, but I'm going to do this. Give me a set of orders, and I'll go off to some base, because I can walk. So I had a little plan. You used to get your flying time, your pay, you had to fly 4 hours a month. So I'd write a set of orders and said that I'm just temporary duty, and I want 4 hours flying time. So I'd go off to some base, and with a small cast on, and I'd walk in and say, here's my orders. I need 4 hours flying time. And so they'd arrange, and I'd fly for 4 hours and go back to the flak house. And a couple days later, I'd write some more orders and go someplace else. So I got to fly a number of aircraft while I was there. And so pretty soon, my 30 days are over. I go back to 3rd Medical, and they send me back to the squadron. Doc Berg was not happy to see me at all, and at that time I got orders to report to General Spot's headquarters in Paris. And they said, they didn't tell me what I was going down there for, And some colonel came to the squadron. He's also assigned on this same deal, same set of orders. And so we go down to Paris together. And his name was Ingolito, and he ended up a 2 or 3 star general. And he had decorations from his neck down to his waist already. And so I get down to Paris, and I'm going to get the Distinguished Service Cross. Well, outside of Leonard Scott, who never really told me what the Distinguished Service Cross was, I wasn't sure what we were about to get. And anyway, we got that and went back to the squadron again, thinking everything at least is pretty close to right. And Berg says, "You're going home." And so that was the end of that, except I'm grounded. And that's why I'm going home. I'm grounded. And so I had all these records with me, and you know, we officers then, I suppose they still do, you carried your own records with you. So I'm going home grounded. Now I got my records. Well, I still have those records, and they're in a foot locker down in my hangar. Nobody else ever got them. And I got home and took a medical and passed it. And so I'm back on flying duty. The war's still on. It looks like we might be going out to the Pacific to make the invasion of Japan. I'm flying the latest P-51, P-51H. Got married, and with my childhood sweetheart, who I met when she was 15. And everything is right in the world, and Harry Truman dropped the bomb and ruined a perfectly good war. So that was just about it. I stayed in until 1948, and I got to fly our first jets, and had a wonderful time, had a wonderful experience, learned a heck of a lot. I got to do things that would have never happened to me and if we hadn't have gotten involved in all of this, so it worked out great.